All right. We are in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Madison Kamek, and I'm the Senior Customer Success Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the show. Ilona is the Head of People at Leaf Group. Welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hello. I'm super happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we will start with a little bit of introduction. So tell us, your pronouns, and then how did you answer this question when you were younger? What do you want to be when you grow up?
I love that question. Well, first, my name is Ilona. I'm delighted to meet you all. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm calling in and I'm based in the lower Hudson Valley in New York. New York City people will call it upstate New York. It is not upstate New York. It's very downstate. And then I'm in this kind of head of people role after 14 years in a human resources career. But the thing that I wanted to be when I was growing up, when I was younger, was a teacher. And sometimes I feel like that's very much a part of my workday life. And then I really thought for a while I would go into some kind of humanitarian aid, thinking about kind of working with UN or similar organizations and try to help people in some capacity, but from a very altruistic perspective. And then, as luck would have it, instead I ended up in human resources.
I love that. Very cool. Well, you definitely, stayed on theme of wanting to help people, focusing on people, caring about people. So very relevant there, I think, still. Yeah. So talking about kind of current industry conversations, what is a conversation in the people HR space that you're most excited about right now, and why?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and there's two of them that I think are really interesting. One is this whole kind of conversation that's going on about who's at fault for all of the corporate layoffs at the moment, and talking about, should we have seen it before? Where did it come from? And the whole discussion of like a real life postmortem happening while the event is still happening is very interesting when it comes to like human beings and people searching for fault, like, why did this happen to me? So that dichotomy is interesting. And then two, just a curiosity around what's going to happen afterwards. Josh Burson did an article a day or two ago, kind of laying out in very layman's terms how we got to the point where companies became so big. And I feel like we do a great job talking about it and laying it out, but then, is it just the same cycle? And are we going to be here in a couple of years again? And then the other conversation that I think is really interesting is kind of this mix between talking about 4 or 5 generations in the workplace, and also what I'm thinking about is like the renegotiation of the employer-employee contract that's happening right now, where maybe there were a set of accepted practices for a really long time that, of course tech got paid X, or of course this is how this works, that all of that is all of a sudden kind of swirling. And I think it's partly because of the generational shift, partly because of the things that have been going on in the last couple of years. And because this new generation, which is kind of taking its voice, I do think just has a very different perspective on work. So that's what I'm paying attention to.
That's awesome. I love all of those, and such an interesting kind of thought process around all of that, and really cool to kind of watch it play out.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about company culture. So with all the changes happening in the workforce, like you mentioned, positive company culture is more sought after than more than ever. Do you think the easiest way to improve company culture is to identify workplace issues, and why or why not?
So when I think about that, it feels a little bit too much like a whack-a-mole strategy. I think being able to identify and really articulate what an issue is like knowing what the symptom is. But the actual core of it is, what is the theme amongst those issues? What's festering at the center that is or is not working? And so to me, it goes back much more to some of these fundamental philosophical questions that need to consistently be readdressed and rechecked, whether it's, why does this organization exist? What is the contract between employee and employer? What are the things that we have agreed to do, and the expectations that people have on us? And then to the point around like understanding what the issue is, is that issue actually tied back to some of these broader questions no longer being as stable as we thought? So yes, you can resolve in the short term an issue and a problem, but you have to be willing to look at what's really underneath.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something kind of we think about too at AllVoices. And it's always important to kind of think about people first and what's, what that's obviously the focus. So putting that into practice, what are some examples of non-negotiables, that companies can implement to have a people first culture?
Yeah. Well, one, I think what it means to be a people first culture is going to be really different everywhere. If you're talking about running a manufacturing facility, the needs of creating a people first environment are going to be different than, a hybrid environment or deskless sort of professional workers. So I don't think that there is a one size fits all. And I really applaud organizations who become very, very specific about what their people first approach means. And then two, it's never really about, the kind of things that we've lauded in the last 10 to 15 years, whether it's the rise of foosball tables or, the vending machine or the free snack. People first culture, that's an outcome of something that you innately believe in and then that you're manifesting. So I think the simple things that can be done are much more around the mindset at work. So something that I really believe in, and people will laugh if they listen to this, I'm a huge Brene Brown guru, and her whole notion around clear is kind. I think a people first culture works to create clarity and speaks in a clear and kind way, because it's recognizing that there's a human on the other side of that interaction that needs to be thought about in how they receive that information. So clear is kind to me is a people first culture. Also the idea of, and this is kind of a tricky one, particularly for folks in my profession on the HR side, the idea of being consistent and fair and staying true to the policies and the systems that uphold those policies, but also knowing when your policy or approach is wrong in that moment or for that person, and being willing to take the chance to do something different. I feel like so much of HR work in particular is like the balance between, but we're going to set a precedent, or if we do this, it means we have to do it for everyone, versus also sometimes having to say, oh boy, maybe our precedent needs to change, or maybe this situation does have a fundamentally different figure. And so taking the time to do that and having a organization that values that additional layer of work, I think automatically starts to create a people first culture, because you're always considering that human at the core of it.
Yeah, it's important to kind of think about that. And, everyone on the team is a human and has to kind of be addressed that way. So I love that kind of idea. What would you say is the relationship between employee team well-being, retention, and the success of a company?
I mean, to me, this won't surprise you. I think it's all linked. I think there's different levels of impact that each of these can have in the moment. At the end of the day, unless the machines are doing the work in certain workplaces, it is the human, it is the person that shows up that is keeping things moving along, whether it's the tone of the conversation or the actual deliverable. And we're not all as great at compartmentalizing as maybe we think we are. All of it comes to work. All of it is showing up at work. You're looking at my home, right? And we're talking about work, and that's just become so normalized. So the notion of it all being interconnected and kind of like a Russian stacking doll, right? That there is the person at the bottom that's filling something, and then there's the job or the company around them, and then the broader culture. I just don't see how we can believe that it's not all connected. And I don't think it's ever a direct correlation where happier employees automatically make a company perform better, but there are enough correlations where that it's a lever or a symptom or a component of the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think a lot of this comes down from like leading by example, and managers, leaders, all of that. How do you think leaders can really encourage that vulnerability and build trust with their team?
I mean, I think the first question, and I love this because this goes back to my guru, Brene, you have to be willing to accept that vulnerability should and does exist in the workplace. And two, you have to be willing to show it, but also accept it when it happens, and know how to kind of treat it and care for it in that moment so that you actually don't create the opposite reaction of the person going, oh my goodness, I was vulnerable and that was an atrocious reaction. I'm never doing that again, because you confirmed that it's not okay to be vulnerable. And so I think as leaders, there's choices that we always have. I think every leader will listen and think, that was a moment where I could have disclosed something, or that was a moment where I could have apologized or said I was wrong. And we make choices whether we do or don't do that, and the tone that we create. And so I think leaders can pause and challenge themselves more in the moment of, can I just take that additional 1% and do something different here? Two, sometimes you have to be deliberate in choosing vulnerability moments. Something that I did earlier in my career, I was kind of in the beginning of my leadership moments. I participated in a video that talked about mental health and disabilities. And I disclosed that I had a mental health problem when I was younger. And just, I remember the power of that and being willing to disclose in a controlled way and seeing that employees go, oh, wow, we're allowed to do that. And that person can be successful and have a life while still having this thing that no one talks about, is very powerful. So again, it's choosing the right moments, creating space for it, being really deliberate and making some choices that show you as a vulnerable person. And then finally, I think all of us just need to remember that we're still human beings at work. And if you thought about that as the core, right? Think about your family as humans, your friends are humans, the people you meet at the store are humans, and you give them some level of care and concern because of that. So the humans are the same at work. So find a way to incorporate that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kind of coming back on that, everyone's a human, notion. And leading kind of on, keeping on with the leaderships and managers. How have you seen managers and leaders, effectively be proactive about preventing burnout?
One, I like when it's true to that leader style and they kind of make it as if it's not a project that they're doing, but two, it's an extension of something that they have. I've seen a number of things, and unfortunately, again, I'm going to say it's a little bit situational. But one, it's really working to understand the rhythm of the way that the team works and finding opportunities to help them level up in that, as well as finding space to make sure that they take care of themselves. I think two, leaders can help remove unwanted distractions, remove kind of less value add work, because the team members may be afraid to say that. And part of burnout is just being overwhelmed by the volume of work. I think the third piece is just modeling it. Admit when you're tired. Tell people as a leader, like, oh man, I've had a long week. I've done too much. I have to be smarter about how I approach next week because my battery is dead. Being willing to also talk about what's happening outside of work. All of these things I know seem kind of basic, but we still talk about them because they're not happening. And they're still the solutions because we haven't made enough progress where we went, that's no longer something we talk about because it's happening everywhere. So there's the modeling, the kind of personal accountability within it, and then keeping and enforcing boundaries for people, whatever it is that they need to feel like they can prevent that burnout and they can prevent that sheer overwhelming nature of everything is going on. I think the leader and manager can help most by making that sacred and not letting it slip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's a great point. And a lot of that comes down to kind of mental health and well-being. The 2022 Employee Wellness Industry Trends Report released by Wellable Labs found that 90% of employers reported increasing their investment in mental health programs. What does an investment in the mental and emotional well-being of employees look like in practice?
Yeah, I think you can find a lot of information about the programs to implement and the proliferation of vendors and solutions in this space in the last several years. And it's kind of amazing to see. It feels like this is something that's blooming really quickly, particularly in the HR tech space and the kind of human development space. And so there's a lot of solutions you can put in place from a systems and a process and what I can access perspective. And that's all great. I think the free part of this is that it's not just about programs, it's about the lived experience at work. And it's about the choices that we make under pressure. It's kind of how we treat people when they're at their worst, how we coach managers and leaders and people in the organization to respond in the hardest moments. Because I think what people mostly go back to is, how do I feel in my one-to-one relation with this other human being at work, particularly if there's a power dynamic? I don't know if it's that study or another study that just came out that talked about the impact that managers have on individuals. And the stat was staggering thing. I think something like 90% of people said that their manager had a bigger impact on their well-being than their spouse, their partner, their family member. So that means that nearly all of our team members look at us every day and they believe that you are impacting how they feel before and after work hours, on the weekends, how they relate to their kids, the level of stress that they have. And when I think you pause and consider that level of responsibility, it would make us all as leaders and managers pause for a minute and go, am I even aware of the gravity of that and the impact that I'm having on someone else's life? And these are statistics. These are, statistically significant studies that are producing these kind of results. So it starts with also understanding the level of impact that you have, not just as a company, as a brand, as an entity, but in the one-to-one moments that we're in all day long.
Wow, that's a wild stat. And I'm
It
glad you
was
brought that up.
shocking to read.
Yeah.
Is this a joke?
Yeah, but I can see it, it's everyone's day to day, and it really can affect them when it's good or bad.
And the anxiety about work at night,
Right.
the conversations that we replay 1,000
Yep.
times,
Mhm.
the word choices that we pick apart, that we talk about at dinner with our family
Yeah,
and friends. Like,
totally.
it's an astounding impact, and
Yeah.
people aren't shutting it off.
Mhm. Wow. What would you say, so we have kind of managers really cultivating that better culture and better well-being at work. What would you say, what role does flexibility play in cultivating a good place to work?
I think it's important. And flexibility is not just about, my working hours. It's flexibility around how people show up, about the level of, actually, to me, it's almost akin to the level of autonomy that somebody has. And it's statistically proven, again, through various science studies and so on, that the level of autonomy that someone has over their job and their experience has a material impact on their engagement and how they feel. So if flexibility and how you show up, when you show up, the way you choose to deliver the results within the space that you have is something that you can give to somebody, and something that you can leverage as part of that agreement that we have with each other in the workplace, I think it's huge. And the other thing is just being very clear, again, clear is kind, around where is there flexibility versus where is there not. So maybe you have an environment where it's just a non-negotiable. People have to come back to the office and they have to, show up at X hours of the day. If that's not the flexibility, where can you give that person autonomy and help them understand that not this, but this thing we do have flexibility on. So let's spend our time talking about that if it's okay.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. What is your philosophy around prioritization, work-life blend, and work-life balance?
To me, it's all integrated. It always has been. I've never been very good. I was never good at kind of systematically separating work and life. So I realized that the healthier approach for me was just to have it be one fluid conversation. And to me, it's all fluid, it's all connected, with the exception that I have learned in the last several years that I actually do need moments where I step away from work and I step away from that thought process, where I completely disconnect, whether it's at the end of the year or otherwise. But then the interesting part is there's also moments where I over-engage at work, right? Where I'm so into it because something's going on. And so again, to me, it's that like blend and that balance of, in the end, do I feel like the scale of where I have spent my time feels right to me at this point in my life and based on what I have going on? And If so, then I'm achieving that balance and integration.
I love that. So looking ahead, what's something that you learned in 2022 that you're applying in 2023?
Balance. So the last several years of my career have just been an absolute whirlwind. And I would say I really, really spent a lot of time working, and I gave up a lot of my personal life on the job and the work that I was doing, but it was a choice. I found the end of that incredibly fulfilling, and I was grateful. I had worked on a merger and acquisition and sort of really large reorganizations with a company, but at the end, I was at peace because of that choice that I made. But I also realized we're not going to do that right for a while. We're going to kind of take what we learned in 2022, and there's a slightly different approach for 2023 because that wasn't healthy necessarily. So the thing that I'm learning is how to kind of create more balance, how to have more boundaries, and how to more deliberately create that balance and flow and that integration of work life without having the scale be in the wrong place too often.
I love that. Let's all go into 2023 with more balance and boundaries.
Yeah.
So last question, is there anything else that, you want to share that I didn't ask? Or if there's 1 to 2, key insights that you hope listeners bring with them after listening?
Yeah, I think I was pondering about this, and the thing that's on my mind all the time that I just think we all need to spend more time thinking about at work and in business is just this idea of this renegotiation of the employer-employee contract and expectations. I fundamentally believe that whether it's a media thing and everyone's just kind of overemphasizing it, all of these kind of waves of resignation or quiet quitting, like these themes that people keep grappling with, it's all kind of large scale behavioral shifts that we're trying to identify, because it feels like we're undergoing this metamorphosis in terms of humans and how they engage with work. And I don't want us to be scared of it. I think that there's a lot of people that can be looking at it and going, wow, this feels really different. I don't feel good about this. And so I don't want to imagine what it means. I don't want to be open to it. I don't want to have the conversation with someone younger who hasn't paid their dues and doesn't want to work more than 9 or 10 hours. My response to that is, why not? What if not everything we had been doing was working? What if me as a millennial, where I worked like a dog for so long, what if that wasn't the best example to set for the next generation? And they're kind of looking at me and going, nope, don't like what you did. Don't like the outcome. Thank you. I'm going to try something else. And so being excited by that conversation, looking at all the signs and all of the themes and topics that are in it, and being open to what comes out of it and how it could reshape our society as a whole, I think is a very powerful place to be. And I would love to see more open and positive conversations on it.
I love that. Great way to end the podcast here. Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed, this conversation. I think a lot of people will learn a lot and get a lot of insights from you here. So thanks so much for being on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was great.
All right. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in.